Hey, this is John from StubGroup. We're an agency that delivers profit-focused digital marketing, and we're also a premier Google partner, and we've helped thousands of businesses fix Google suspension issues and stay compliant with Google policy. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You are seeing this Circumventing Systems policy in your account. You are in a good company in that this is probably one of the most common suspension reasons that we see when businesses reach out to StubGroup for help with suspensions. It's a doozy. It's not a light one. It's one of the ones that Google calls an egregious policy violation, and it takes a lot of work to fix, but it is fixable often. I can never guarantee anything. I can't guarantee it's fixable in your situation, but I can tell you that we have a high success rate of fixing it for the clients that we have worked with. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the policy, what can trigger it, and some of the things that we do when we work here at StubGroup on fixing this policy violation. So first of all, let's take a look together at the actual policy from Google. So I've got it pulled up on my screen here. And this Circumventing Systems policy is basically a subcategory under Google's abusing the ad network policy or list of ad policies. So you'll see it here under malicious software, under compromised sites, and so forth. And there's actually some correlations with some of those policies and this policy that I'll mention a little bit later in the video as well, because you might be seeing both of those flags in your ad account. But let's go back down to Circumventing Systems. So let's just do a quick read through. I won't read every word here, but you'll get the gist. So the following is not allowed. Engaging in practices that circumvent or interfere with Google's advertising systems and processes or attempts to do so. And it gives some examples. So things kind of within your ads and URLs like cloaking or redirects. So a redirect would be where you have one URL in your ad, but when someone goes to that URL, it redirects to a different place, maybe a different page on your website, or maybe even a different website in general. That's a violation of Google's policies. So those types of things are an issue. Also, a lot of issues around maybe other accounts existing, which again, we'll dig into in a minute here in this video. So Google says, for example, if you have repeated or simultaneous policy violations across any of your accounts, including 2 or more of your accounts to post ads, blah, 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 bypassing enforcement mechanisms, attempting to use a Google Ads system after a previous suspension decision, so forth and so on. Also submitting false information as part of their verification programs, and some very specific stuff as it pertains to gambling. And Google also mentions as a note down here that they may take action on an advertiser's account. In other words, they might suspend you based on adverse regulatory warnings, settlements, or rulings about an advertiser's advertising practices, or important to note, direct complaints from users or businesses. So there's a couple ways to think about this policy. The way it's written by Google and described is essentially if Google flags you with this policy, they're saying you're trying to get around their systems, hence the word circumventing, that you're trying either with URLs you're using in your ads or your use of accounts or things like that, you're trying to get around their policies. Now, I will say that this policy also tends to be a little bit of a catch-all policy for lots of different violations that Google doesn't like to see on your websites or in your accounts. So in other words, I've seen a very wide variety of types of issues that we've been able to fix that had ultimately caused a circumventing suspension policy issue. And I think that's probably why this is one of the most common policy violations that we see, again, in advertisers who reach out to us looking for help, is because it's a little bit of a catch-all policy. So let's talk through a couple of different things that could be related to or could cause this policy violation. So first of all, let's talk about multiple ad accounts. So this is something that we see happen often, where either intentionally or unintentionally, an advertiser is using multiple ad accounts and they start to get the hot water with Google's systems. Now, when I say they start to get into hot water, it's because technically there's not a policy against having multiple ad accounts. And there are many reasons why you might legitimately want to have multiple ad accounts. For example, let's say you are an entrepreneur and you have multiple businesses. You might want to have separate ad accounts per business. Or maybe you are a large brand and you have multiple divisions within your brand and you have different people responsible for advertising and you don't want everything occurring in one account. You might have multiple accounts. Or another common example would be advertising in different geographies. Maybe you're expanding beyond the US to Canada or the UK or something like that, and you want to use a different ad account for that expansion. So there are a lot of legitimate reasons why you might have multiple ad accounts, either for you as an individual having multiple ad accounts, again, maybe you have multiple businesses, or for the same business to have multiple ad accounts. However, this is also something that kind of gets into a gray area with Google, not because it's against policies, but because Google is constantly looking for people who are trying to game the system, to get an unfair advantage, which, by the way, is the name of another policy that you can violate with Google, or just do things that are sketchy, do things that are spammy, do things that Google thinks are not in the best favor of the safety of the Google ecosystem and the users who are using it. And so often when we see a circumventing system suspension, there might be multiple ad accounts at play. One thing that we see is that sometimes a business, a person involved in the business won't realize there was another ad account. They'll go create a new ad account, not realize that, hey, maybe we have another ad account, we're using the same credit card to pay for it, years ago, something like that, kind of got lost to time, or maybe there just wasn't good communication internally with the team. Could be a host of reasons, but that's not uncommon to see. And so basically we've got to go to Google and talk through the existence of multiple accounts, try to explain to Google what happened, where things went wrong, and get Google to understand that you weren't trying to game the system and that it was a legitimate mistake, or not even a mistake necessarily, because it's not inherently a problem to have multiple accounts, but prove to them your legitimacy as a business and why the ad account shouldn't be suspended. So a lot of times there's kind of multiple accounts at play, and sometimes we have to do some detective work too to even figure out what accounts exist. Another thing that happens often is even if you don't have multiple accounts, you might have multiple websites that you're advertising from one ad account. Now, that is not a policy violation per se, and there are some cases where it's actually the quote-unquote safest approach to take from a policy perspective. But there are other times where it can trigger Google to think that something suspicious is going on. A good example of this would be we had an agency we're working with where they had a single ad account for a ton of different businesses. I think they had like 60 or 70 different businesses they were advertising out of a single ad account. And first of all, that just looks weird to Google. It looks suspicious. Why is this going on? It kind of matches patterns that Google sometimes sees with bad actors in the space, and so it can flag Google to have concerns there. And then also, if there's any kind of issue with any of the domains in that account, let's say one website gets hacked and Google sees that, and then they will suspend the whole ad account and therefore all of the advertising for all of the unrelated domains that are in that account. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into this that we'll kind of consult with clients about and tell them, okay, where does it make sense to have multiple ad accounts? Where does it make sense to have one ad account in order to both comply with Google's policies, but also to be as safe as possible to avoid triggering any of the automated systems and things that Google has in place that could create problems for you, even though you're not trying to do anything wrong. So multiple accounts, multiple websites in an account, those are common things that we deal with related to circumventing system suspensions. Redirects is another thing that I mentioned. We've had a lot of situations with this. One thing that comes to mind, we had a client who a couple of years ago, they had changed their domain. They had one domain, then they rebranded, moved to a different domain. And they had done, what makes sense. They'd put a redirect from their previous domain over to their new domain. So the people who had their previous domain would just automatically show up to the new website. And they weren't doing anything wrong within Google either in terms of how they were running active ads. So the active ads they were running were pointing to the correct new domain. But they had paused ads that they hadn't run actually for years that were pointing to the old domain. And they didn't realize that Google still crawls paused ads. And if they find issues with paused ads, that can still get your account suspended. And so that's what happened there. Their account was suspended. They didn't know why. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And so we dug into it and helped them and ultimately figured out that it was because of these old ads and this old redirect. Google had triggered that or had crawled that had triggered the issue, and we were able to get that fixed. But that's various different kinds of redirects is something that happens fairly frequently in the circumventing systems suspension space. Another kind of companion that we'll see often is something I mentioned earlier in this video, which is often if we'll see a flag for malicious software or compromised website, we'll also see the circumventing systems flag at the same time. So you might see both of these policies being mentioned on the ad level where you have the policy details, or potentially even separate red bars of death at the top where Google gives the reason for the suspension. And often what we'll find here is if we fix that malicious software issue or the compromised website issue, that often that will also clear up the circumventing systems, that there aren't actually two separate unique policy violations, but that Google is basically triggering both of those policies with the same problem. And when you fix that problem, you can get both resolved. So that's something we see happen fairly often as well. Now, the last thing I will say is because, like we talked about, this is somewhat of a catch-all policy. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you get flagged for this policy that it's just an account, redirect issue or multiple accounts, multiple domains, that type of thing. There could be other things at play as well. Again, we looked at, Google explicitly says in their policy that they look at third-party information, that they look at complaints about an advertiser, things like that. And so that's why whenever we're working with clients who hire us for help with this type of thing, we're looking at, first of all, their website, make sure everything gets perfect there, it's got all the right policies in place, the messaging is clear, you've got the right disclaimers, things like that, and then addressing any issues we might find in the ad account as well. But then also looking beyond that, what is your reputation online? So here's a very concrete example. If you've got lots and lots of negative reviews about your business online, that's something that Google looks at and could be a factor in Google saying, you know what, these guys don't look trustworthy. They shouldn't be advertising. And so if you are in the unfortunate position of having negative reviews, you should be responding to those, dealing with those very professionally, wherever those reviews are, dealing with them. If you're making mistakes, own it, explain how you're fixing problems. If you're not making mistakes, professionally explain what's going on and why the feedback isn't relevant, things like that. But basically think about your online reputation. When you Google your name, that's what Google can do as well when Google's looking to see what's going on online about your brand. And so try and make sure what comes up is good and that you are showing how legitimate you are to Google as well as to consumers. So those are some thoughts about the Circumventing Systems policy. Not fully comprehensive because honestly there's so many different things, there's so many different nuances that play into every single suspension. It would be impossible to cover all of it in one video or even a series of videos. And so that's why we help businesses. So if you're in a situation where you're suspended, you're not sure what to do, you need help, you want to go to the experts, we're here to help you. Reach out through StubGroup.com. We'll have a consultation to see if we're the right fit for you. And then hopefully we can get you hooked up with one of our dedicated team members who just spends all day, every day focused on fixing suspensions, and you can leverage our expertise and experience to get back online with Google. Until next time, thanks for watching. Have a great day.